Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with classical music's most powerful, quiet climaxes. And today's is by Beethoven. It's going to require a little bit of discussion so that you sort of get what he's going at. But once you do, you hear the quiet climax no matter what. Just to appreciate fully the genius behind this particular example, we need to do a little bit of music history or a little bit of discussion, because it occurs in the first movement of his Fourth Symphony, at the moment of the recapitulation. And I've got wait a minute, let me get my Beethoven box here. Oh, wow. Here it is. It's the Access Complete Beethoven edition. But just stuff that there for the moment. Here's the deal. In all movements in sonata form, which is basically the first movement form of all symphonies and concertos ever written between, Haydn's day to, it could be very recently. Not so much today, but it could be very recently. Not because it's a rule, but because it's just a natural way of doing things. It really is. It arose as an inevitable consequence of making music dramatic and full of excitement and narrative content and climaxes and things like that. So anyway, the bottom line is, as some of you may know, a movement that takes traditional sonata form has two subjects or ideas, and those subjects can contain any amount of material, any amount of themes or ideas. The important thing is that they're separated by key. You start in your home key, you go to the next closest key away for your second subject. It's called the dominant, if you care. And then you have a development thing where all of the themes that you've tossed out so far get worked up, or some of them, or stuff happens. It's the drama section. Things happen. The melodies get transformed, and then eventually they work their way back to the home key and what we call the recapitulation, the return of the original material, which will yet be a little bit changed because everything has to be restated eventually to keep the music in its home key, not to go afar as had happened originally and started to get further away from the home key. So everything's going to come back. And that moment of return, the moment when it comes back to the home key, is always a critical thing in a sonata form movement. And Beethoven was one of the composers who really dramatized that moment. In other words, he made it an event. And usually the event, it depends on how the thing starts. If the first subject is soft, then quite naturally the return event will often be soft. Sometimes it'll be loud if you want to return to a loud version of the original thing. That happens in Haydn, actually. He can change things around all the time. But in generally speaking, you're going to want to have a smooth transition. If the opening was loud, then you can work up to a furious climax that winds up in a loud recapitulation, or the opening of the recapitulation. Here's a classic example of the loud climax leading to the dramatic return of the opening, which everybody knows. Here it is. Yeah, from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, from the first movement, the moment of recapitulation. The orchestra girds its loins and gathers its strength and goes and explodes into the recapitulation. And that concept was picked up by lots of composers later. Brahms uses it in his First Symphony, and Tchaikovsky in his Fourth Symphony, and virtually all the Russian symphonies after Tchaikovsky's Fourth do something similar to that. Shostakovich was a big one. His Fifth Symphony and Eighth Symphony, they have these huge climaxes that spill over into the recapitulation. His 10th Symphony, they all do that. So that's a very useful, exciting, and kind of foolproof way to handle a recapitulation. In his Eroica Symphony, the third, which I'm not going to play, but I'll just explain it, it begins quietly. Do, 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 do. So the recapitulation could also begin quietly. And Beethoven does something very amusing at the moment of recapitulation in the first movement of the Eroica. He lets the horn come in with the tune over the wrong harmony. So it creates this dissonant crunch, which the full orchestra immediately wakes up and says, corrects, and says, no, it goes this way, with a big, loud da, da, boom. And we're back at the soft recapitulation. But in his fourth symphony, Beethoven does something really quite remarkable, because it's a loud exposition. That is, the first subject is very noisy. It's a full, big orchestral explosion. And in the recapitulation, Beethoven presents it quietly. He does it very quietly. And then there's a climax, and we come back to it because we realize that all the quietness that's come before was actually the moment when we arrived back at our home key, but we just didn't know it because the dynamics were so different. And that's what makes this so powerfully wonderful. So let me just play you the initial exposition, the way the first subject of the Fourth Symphony opens. There's a big, long, quiet introduction and all that stuff. And then it's just like, boom, it goes off like a rocket. And here it is. Yeah, really moves, right? And it's very, very loud and obstreperous and volcanic. But when we get to the recapitulation, listen to the timpani. Because the timpani, in Beethoven's day, the drums could only play usually two notes, tonic and dominant. That is the basic key note, and then the one a fifth higher. And he lets the timpani tell us that we're actually back. But the rest of the orchestra isn't so sure. And it drifts around a little bit and rests on a couple of different harmonies, but the timpani's just sitting there rolling the tonic note, saying, no, we're in B flat. This is B flat. You should know we're in B flat. It's really B flat. And then finally the orchestra sort of wakes up and realizes, holy crap, we've been there all along. It's an amazingly powerful, quiet moment that serves an amazing dramatic purpose. And that's what makes Beethoven a genius. So here you go. I hope you sort of got that feeling when the full orchestra comes in. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't like, oh, it's a different key area, it's a different place, a different location. It's not. It's exactly where we're supposed to be, and we've been there for a minute or two. Really an amazing, amazing moment and a fabulous demonstration, a long-term demonstration of the power of quiet music to create a climax where you'd least expect it in a way which is completely new and fabulous. So thanks for joining me, friends. I hope this example sort of turned you on to the Fourth Symphony, because it's a very neglected work in Beethoven's output, his symphonic output. It's the least played, or one of the most neglected of all of his symphonies. The Eighth also a little bit, but that's still a late work. It gets some cred, you know what I mean? But the Fourth, it comes between the Eroica and the Fifth, these two colossal, loud things. And the Fourth mostly makes its points in a softer way, but it's no less powerful. It's a brilliant, brilliant work, and I hope you give it, the whole thing, a serious listen for just how amazing it is. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.